So I didn't know anything about the SEALs. I started to journal and ask, well, how could I do that? I wasn't sure. Military was certainly on the list. I thought maybe flying jets or something like that. This is how synchronicity plays out. And I was walking home one night. I used to love to walk. The subways were a pain in the ass. I would only take the subways if I was in a hurry. And I took this new route, and I walked past a Navy recruiting office, and there was a poster in the window kind of facing out, and the top of the poster said, "Be someone special." And it had Navy SEALs doing cool shit on it. But I looked at that, and I just was transfixed. I said, that's it. That's how I'm supposed to be a warrior.
My name is Derek Wolfe. I'm a Super Bowl champion and a 10-year NFL vet. Now, after a decade of professional football, I'm focusing on my other passions. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Wolfe Untamed. Today's guest is Mark Devine. Mark was a Navy SEAL. He joined the Navy SEALs at 26 years old, and we're going to talk all about that and how his leadership skills have just gotten better and better over the years. And it seems like this guy's an absolute natural leader, so hope you enjoy it. All right, Mark, again, appreciate the time, man. This is I've been looking forward to this one because you don't meet too many Zen people that go from Zen to Navy SEALs.
I don't know how many there's been.
Yeah, I've never heard of any, so I've heard of it going the opposite way.
That's true, yeah.
So I'm just really interested in hearing more about that. So I'll just let you take off, kind of talk about where you came from, where you grew up, and what kind of led you into that path of the Navy SEALs, because you started studying Eastern philosophies. And I want to kind of just hear about that and let you tell a story.
It's a fun story to tell. If we had 2 hours, I'd probably fill it with a story. I would get really into the weeds into training because I'm a trainer by heart, like you are probably. So I'm from New York State, upstate, a really small town. I didn't even know how small town it was until a friend of mine Googled it, and he was like, you got to be kidding me. Like Barneville, New York, population 375. That's where you're from. It's like, damn. But there was a lot of cool things about that, right? I had to kind of fend for myself. I didn't really have any friends in my town. One kid across the street who ended up dying as an alcoholic and fell off a roof, when he was in his 40s. So, it was a place to get out of, right? In other words. And my family was also a place to get out of. My dad was a raging alcoholic, and with the emphasis on rage, right? And so there's a lot of emotional turmoil and abuse. And, as a kid, you don't really get the impact of that. But for me, what it did was kind of shut me down emotionally on the negative side. And the positive side, it made me really like hypersensitive and aware, right? Which was really great for SEAL training and spec ops. In fact, I think a lot of spec ops guys come from kind of traumatized childhoods. That's my assertion anyways, and I think it's probably true. Because there's a lot of benefit that can come from that. You couldn't hurt me. You know what I mean? Like when I got the buds, I was like, you instructors got nothing on my dad.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
You're making this look easy. But the other benefit was partly because we lived in upstate New York in a small rural area and spent our summers on Lake Placid. I spent an enormous amount of time outside, which is a real shame that, kids don't grow up that way these days. Not all of them. I mean, some do. But intentional living, parents obviously do that. So I developed a lot of athleticism and a lot of endurance because I used to just, run the trails of the Adirondacks relentlessly. Hard, to kind of like relieve the pain that I was feeling inside but couldn't identify. But I felt really good after a long, like run up Whiteface Mountain. And then I would wrap my ankles and put knee pads on and play tag with a friend of mine on the way down, wiping out and doing like spins and flips. And we were just we'd be all bloody and bruised, but just exhilarated. So that was kind of the backdrop. I was smart enough to get into a school called Colgate University, which was about 45 minutes from my home. It's a really good liberal arts school. And that began to kind of open my eyes a little bit to what's possible. And I got into competitive swimming and then rowing. And so that kind of further forged the, kind of the mental toughness and the athleticism that sports can give you. Because I was part of this fraternity, I had a bunch of smart economics majors in it. They were all gunning for these highfalutin jobs down in New York City. And, here's Mark from Barneville, New York, population 375, was groomed to go back to run the family business in Utica, which is the bumper community. We were a bumper community in Utica. And I started because of them, I started asking myself, I wonder if I could do that, right? Because just going straight back to the family business seemed kind of like a cop out to me. Not that it was bad. It just like, maybe I try something else before that, you know what I mean? And maybe make some money, because that was, that's what they were heading down there. And I was like, that doesn't sound bad, So I applied. I wasn't like academically really qualified. Those guys were like 3.8 GPA getting hired at Goldman Sachs and whatnot. But there was a program that the big accounting consultant firms had, where they would hire people and send you to NYU, hire liberal arts grads and send us to NYU to get our master's in accounting. And I thought that sounded like a good program. I get a master's degree. So I applied for that, and I actually got hired by Coopers & Lybrand, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I find myself in Manhattan. I'm getting closer to answering your direct question. Like, how did I go from, how did I get into SEALs when I grew up and never even heard of the damn thing? And my father was like rabidly against the military. The military was like for people who were losers and dropouts in society. And he had that attitude largely because, he got drunk in college and drove a friend's car into a fraternity house front door. Wrecked both the car and front of the house, and he was sitting, in front of a judge, and the judge is like, "Okay, Lees, you got two choices. Choice A, you can go to jail, or B, you can join the army." And he said, "B, I'll take B."
Yeah.
And so his experience in the army started out kind of on a negative note, and he didn't have a good time. So it was for drunks and losers, according to him. Well, that was in. He was in Germany post World War II, for the rebuilding. Actually, it was the 11th Airborne, which they disbanded because they started to lose their mission focus, and they were all drinking and just making a mess of things. And so they ended up disbanding that entire unit. I think he was only in for I don't know what, probably 4 years. I think that was the minimum enlistment. Anyway, so I ended up taking this job, and I had to go on academic probation because of my GPA, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to go for it. And I ended up, getting through the first semester, doing, getting straight A's. I'm like, wow, actually, maybe I am smart. That's when I learned like Colgate is academically really rigorous. I went to NYU and I got straight A's. Like, wow, how can it be so different? Anyways, so I find myself in Manhattan now, 5 weeks after graduating Colgate, and everyone around me at Coopers, including most of my peers who just come out of college, were kind of out of shape. And the older they were, the worse out of shape they were. Fat, pasty, awful lifestyle. And I remember at that age, I was 21, just saying, you know what, that's not me. I'm going to be fit for life. And so that just kind of came from inside me. Like, I didn't read a book about it. We're talking about 1985. Like, I'm not going to be that way. So I would get up every morning and run 6 miles, come back and do a little stretching, before meditation, just kind of journaling and stuff. And at lunchtime, my peers would go and have like a burger, high carb lunch, and I would go to the gym. And I would grab some, whatever equipment I could find, I kind of like fence it off. And then I'd be like the Tasmanian devil, just doing, circuits around this equipment. Basically, high intensity interval training before we knew what it was.
Yeah, hit training before anybody did. Yeah.
Right. I'm sure we all did our version of that, right? Because you didn't want someone to walk away with your dumbbell, kind of piss on it and say, don't touch this. And then Coopers would let us off at 5 p.m. because we were a cohort. So there were probably, 7 or 8 of us from Coopers who would have to make it down to NYU, which is at the World Trade Center, Stern School of Business back then. And so school would start at 7:30. And so they let us off around 5:30. And most people would go eat, change, study, and make their way down there. And this is the inflection point, because I was like, that's another training block. Like, that's a 2.5 hour window. I can do some physical activity there. But I didn't want to run again. I didn't want to go to the gym again. And other things really took too much time. You know what I mean? Like sports activities didn't quite line up, whatnot. And I was having those thoughts while I was walking home one night on 23rd Street. And I suddenly heard these like shouts coming from the second floor of this building that I was standing near or walking by, and I stopped and I looked up and I was standing under a sign, a flag that said World Sado Karate Headquarters. And I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Martial arts. I hadn't thought about that. We didn't have any martial arts in upstate New York. I was intrigued with it because my freshman roommate at Colgate, who came in and was really immature and kind of a jerk, had taken up Shotokan karate. And I watched him over the 4 years I was at Colgate. And, whereas I was swimming and drinking beer with my fraternity mates and chasing women, he was getting really serious into his studies with karate. And by the time he graduated, he was a black belt heading off to Japan to continue his karate studies and to teach English. And he had completely transformed. Like, I watched him transform and going like, wow, what the hell? Like, I just felt older and maybe fitter, but I didn't feel different. And so when I stood under that flag, I was like, I wonder if this is something that could not only be a good physical training, but more like mental and emotional, like Dave, like I saw with him. I went upstairs and I was immediately transfixed by that Japanese guy who was leading the class. And it was the founder of this style of karate. He had like 300,000 students worldwide at that time already. Tadashi Nakamura. And he was incredible. He was a legend in Japan. I saw him do things I didn't know human beings could do. And his presence, he was a true master, Kevin, in the sense of how we would think of that term. Like, he had mastered himself physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. He carried himself differently than anyone I saw. Like, he was incredibly humble, but devastatingly effective. You know what I mean? Like, he had extreme competence, but he wore it with humility, simplicity, spontaneity, playfulness. He'd be like, he'd lead in a class, and then someone would say something funny. He would just like burst out, like giggling like a schoolgirl. This guy was really funny. So I signed up on the spot and I started training the karate. One Thursday night, I wanted to stay and watch the black belts. This is pretty early on, maybe a month in. And the black belts had a dedicated black belt class on Thursday night. So I stayed to watch that. It was pretty motivating. Like, I could see myself doing that someday, just keep training. And after the class was over, everyone's kind of filtering out. They're turning off the lights, but they kept the lights on in one area, and someone lit a candle. And about 10 black belts pulled over these wooden benches and lined them up. And I was like, what are they doing? And a senior student said, well, that's the Zen class. And I was like, what's Zen? They said, it's a form of meditation from the Japanese tradition. There's a book by a guy named Suzuki called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Go check it out at the library, buy it, and you'll learn more about it. And I did. And I was inspired. I didn't understand a whole lot of what I was reading. You know what I mean? They're pretty opaque books, hard to understand. But they was talking about things like developing your mind and integrating mind and spirit. And I remember one quote. He said, your awareness is like a swinging door, right? You breathe in and it swings one way, and it's like spirit, and you breathe out and swing the other way, and it's like ego, personality. I was like, that's interesting. It's like a koan to contemplate on before I knew what that was. So I asked Nakamura, I said, can I join this class? I noticed it's only black belts and I'm a white belt. And he said, yes, of course we meet, but please give it a chance, right? Don't like come to two and quit. He goes, this is really, powerful. It's an important part of our training. I wish more students could do it. So I came to class and I started sitting in Zen with him on Thursday nights. And it was hard at first. I called it concentration camp because the beginning Zen practice is primarily about developing the power of concentration, which is to like radically contract your awareness to one thing. And in his case, it was two things. He had us inhale through our nose, exhale through the nose. So that's the one thing. Follow the breath, and then count one. And then inhale, exhale, count two. And the only rub was you couldn't think of anything else. You keep your mind absolutely pinned to the inhale, exhale count. And if you found yourself thinking about something, you had to go back to zero and start over. The first few times I tried this, I would sit there, I'd be thinking, and I'd get to 10. I'm like, it's easy. And then when I was honest about it, I'm like, no, I was thinking the whole freaking time, right? I had like split attention, which is very common. Like, I was able to inhale, exhale, count one, inhale, exhale, count two, and I had a little bit of attention there, but most of my mind was wandering through the pastures, Anyways, I'm getting there. I told you I could take 2 hours to tell the story.
I love this because I can, when it comes to I've done a lot of meditation as well. And it is one of those things. I have the ability to hyper focus on, and that's like when I find something that I really want to do,
You go
I
deep and
just like,
long. Same here.
it's almost, you become like psychotic about it because it's just like, you have to, that's all you can think about,
Yeah.
and
Right.
it's,
But it's an acquired skill, right?
it
Like,
is.
most people don't have that in our attention deficit world, right? There's radical distractions all over the place. So we actually train this with our SEAL training. So the first thing you got to do is learn how to control your attention. And so in order for them to control their attention, they have to control their arousal. So we teach them arousal control and then attention control. And then through the daily practice, it deepens the power of concentration. And then they're off to the races, right? Then we can start to do some real work with them. It's almost like preparatory work to deeper meditation, where you're going to get into like insight meditation or non-dual awareness or awakening, like witnessing. Some different terms are used, and I can describe what they all mean. But I had that experience. So first it was, and oh, by the way, because we grew up in the wilderness and I grew up without an iPhone and without all the distractions of social media, and a competitive swimmer and triathlete, I could already concentrate fairly well. So it was somewhat easier for me to learn how to meditate and concentrate than it probably is for someone today. So we have to kind of recognize that.
Yeah.
We were less distracted. How old are you right now, Kevin?
I'm 35. I didn't have a cell phone. We didn't have cell phone.
Oh, you didn't have a cell phone. So you're probably last gen that didn't have a cell phone. I'm 61 now. So I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and like we had 3 channels on TV and cassette tapes.
Right. Yeah. We didn't, I grew up in a small town as well. So I just was out. When the sun came up, I got tossed out of the house and didn't.
Get out and play.
Yeah. Don't come home till it's dark. All right. That was every day. And that's how I grew up.
Awesome.
And I grew up doing the same thing, running around the woods and hunting and fishing and,
Yeah, it's a real blessing now that you look back on it.
Absolutely.
Right? So it took probably 6 months. Now, meditation, for those listening who maybe haven't tried it or have tried it and failed, because I hear that all the time with my clients. It's just not for me, or I can't control my mind. The mind's all over the place. You got to give it time.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't go into the gym and expect to do a 135-pound snatch your first time.
Right.
You know what I mean? You got to build up to it. There's a progression. So you got to like crawl, walk, run, just like you said in the SEALs. So the crawl phase is just to learn to hold your attention and try to like see if you can get to that 5 count. Like that Zen practice is a really good beginner's practice. Just inhale deeply, exhale, count. Try to get to 5. The other one, which we teach, is called box breathing. And so there's an inhale, then a hold, and an exhale, then a hold. So 5 count in, 5 count, hold your breath, 5 count, exhale, 5 count, hold your breath. And just follow that box and even visualize the box in your mind. And that's a great way. Imagery work is a great way to hold your attention and to develop concentration. So if you can get to where you can hold your attention for up to 50% of the practice, let's say it's a 20-minute practice, which is highly recommended. If you can hold your attention for 10 of that, and the rest you notice your mind is wandering, and you're like, okay, my mind's wandering, bring it back. You bring it back to the pattern, to the attention. One of the benefits for that is actually you learn to notice quicker. So like in, early stage, you might be wandering around the reservation for 2 or 3 minutes before you notice, before suddenly like, oh shit, I'm supposed to be not doing that. I'm supposed to be concentrating on the inhale and the exhale. But over time, just a few seconds might go by and you're like, oh, I lost my attention. Bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. And that's incredibly valuable because again, that it's like a gauge keeps on. Your mind is getting sharper and sharper, and it's noticing more and more. So it has an amazing spillover benefit to be able to notice things in your life, right? Because your mind is clear that when you're concentrating on one thing, you get very clear signals if suddenly you're noticing something that doesn't really match the pattern, right?
Yeah. And do you think that's more like that helps you become self-aware of like what's...
That's right. Self-aware,
most people are walking around
situationally aware.
Most people are, I'll just give you, I was at like an EDM concert, like a music concert, like like electronic music last night with my wife. And it was like 8,000 people crammed. It was like trying to put, 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound
I
bag.
can't stand those, by the way.
Yeah, it was so packed and everything. And just the way people are so unaware of what's happening around them, and they're just kind of wandering around and like,
sleepwalking.
yeah, it's just incredible to me. Like when I'm in a, it's so overstimulating for me to be in that situation that I like hyper focus on everything around me. You know,
Right.
so I'm
You
like,
become the sheepdog.
yeah,
Same here.
I'm
Yeah,
just
you're watching everything. You're like, you're gaming out what would happen if there was a crisis,
exactly.
or like an active shooter or something like that. And, oh, that's the exit I'm going to take. Yeah, that's the curse of the warrior.
Yeah, that's what
and the blessing too.
I always make sure I'm, because like right now, what's happening is all these would-be terrorists are like driving cars into crowds of people, right? And I was like, man, if somebody decided to just like come cruising through here in a car, like they would wipe all these people out. Like it would be because then people would get trampled and it would be a disaster. So I like moved my wife and I to a spot where I was like, now I know that if I hear screaming, we can get out of here without,
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah, so
get your exit.
I always think that way of like, what's my exit? Yeah. That's why I have a really hard time on airplanes.
I know.
Because there is no exit.
There is no exit.
You're just stuck there.
Yeah, you're stuck. Yeah, so that the practice of concentration training will develop that attention control. It'll develop power of concentration where you can hold your attention, like you said, and go deep, like do deep work without distraction for as long as you need to. When I'm writing a book, I'm going to write for 4 to 6 hours, right? With barely any, breaks. Because I'm just like, okay, this is what we're doing. You click in and you go deep. My 1 year I wrote 2 books and published both of them, right? So that's how powerful your focus becomes. It's pretty cool. And you become more situationally aware, like we're talking about, because your mind is getting more sharp and it's able to see more things, pattern recognize better. And you also mentioned you become more self-aware because that process, what naturally happens when you practice this concentration is if you stick with it long enough, you begin to develop this metacognition where you're doing the practice and suddenly thoughts will happen. And part of you is watching the practice and doing the practice while simultaneously watching that these thoughts are happening. And so you have this epiphany that you are not your thoughts. Thoughts are things that happen to you, but they are not who you are. You see, most people can never have that insight or that awareness. And so they're completely merged with their thoughts and their emotions. They're like, I am angry. No, anger is happening. You are not angry, right?
Yep.
Because, by saying I am angry, you're completely identifying with anger, but that's not who you are. Just anger. Anger is some energy that's happening that you have a story around that you're calling anger.
I'm glad you said that, the story part, because what I think, I know I did this for a long time, is I would allow a thought to enter my head. And then instead of just like, it's like you can address that thought and not engage with it and just kind of let it go.
Just watch it.
It just disappears. Or like I used to do is I'd create my own a story out of that.
That's right.
Something that didn't even happen. And now I'm like feeling angry and anxiety and all these other feelings that come up because of something that didn't even happen.
And you even said, like, it's not accurate to say you allow a thought to happen. Thoughts just happen. You can't not allow them,
right?
Not to happen, right? They will happen because it's programming, it's conditioning. It's even picking up other people's thoughts or collective consciousness thoughts. Thoughts happen. That's just the way the brain works. Some of them are generated from some internal sensation or trigger. Some of them are generated by some external situation or trigger, like you talked about how you were thinking last night about because you were in this crowded arena. Some of them just randomly pop up, right? Boom. And if you engage with it, sometimes you want to engage with it. You're like, oh, that's really interesting. Let me lean into that. Let me think about that, right? Because that could be important. Fine. That's a positive application of leaning in and like working with a thought, but you still don't identify with that thought. You have a non-attached kind of posture toward it, and you just kind of work with it. Say, interesting, where could that take me? But if it's a random or negative thought, you just watch it. Like the metaphor we use is like you're the mountain, and the thoughts are like clouds passing by in the sky. You just let it pass by, and you're still the mountain.
Hey guys, I want to talk to you about one of my favorite sponsors, Juniper Mountain Coffee. Coffee without compromise. You're getting high quality coffee without the high prices. This is an American company that stands behind their values. They stand behind their coffee. These guys make some of the best coffee I've ever had. It's a coffee I drink every morning. Juniper Mountain Coffee works directly with the farmers, paying fair wages, and that way you have no middleman. There's no BS, no garbage. You're getting high quality products. So go check them out at junipermountaincoffee.com. I came from a really rough childhood as well, with an abusive stepfather and an alcoholic mother. So coming from that kind of childhood, as you know, a lot of negative thoughts can creep in, self-doubt and stuff like that. This stuff just kind of creeps in. And I think that, what you're talking about, this being able to meditate and process that stuff, traditional therapy just never worked for me.
No, it can be helpful for some deeply entrenched stuff that, may not reveal itself in meditation, but it's revealing itself through kind of behaviors, energy that you kind of project into other people or transfer onto other people. So it can be helpful, I think, anyways, or has been for me. But you're right. I mean, in the Tibetan and the Indian traditions of yoga and Tibetan Buddhism, like meditation was considered like depth therapy.
Oh, yeah.
It was not just about mental training, it was emotional as well, because they looked at all that as just energy.
Yep. Right?
A thought energy or emotional energy is energy. Thought is just the story around the sensations and the feelings, right? So essentially what I'm suggesting is that if you start with this practice of concentration and let me back up, and you have a solid grip on homeostatic balance, meaning you're not anxious, right? Like if you're super anxious, you don't stand a prayer of meditating. And what is anxiety? But it's energy, negative energy that's been stored in your body. And it usually often comes from those things you were talking about, shame, guilt, rage, anger, low self-esteem. And so you kind of split off those parts of yourself and they're stored inside because they're too painful to confront. And that creates kind of a split right in you. And so that split creates this anxiety and or depression. And so you're not able to focus. And also, if you take on a lot of stressors, from our culture, right? Time pressure, overcommitment pressure, deadline pressure, burnout from too much coffee, too much alcohol, not enough sleep. All the things that, like, I train my clients. Okay, first, let's get your body healthy, because if your body healthy, your brain is going to be healthy, and you need to be in balance. And so, the best way to get into balance is breathing practice, right? Exercise, sleep, and nutrition, but also breathing, nostril breathing, 5 count in, 5 count hold, 5 count out, 5 count hold, box breathing. Well, guess what? While you're getting yourself into that arousal control, de-stress state, you can also practice the attention control and concentration. So you get a twofer. So as you practice that, depending upon your kind of development already, right? So for me, I had been doing, running around the woods in nature and, doing competitive swimming and rowing and triathlons for years. And so I had a lot of kind of preparation. And so it happened for me probably within 9 months, 6 to 9 months, where I opened up to that mindfulness. For others, if you've never done that kind of preparatory work, it may probably take longer. I would suggest that it's probably going to take a couple of years. But what will happen is the mind will have that sudden opening where you become the observer, as we've discussed, and you're able to observe thoughts as if they're coming from a little bit of afar, almost like, oh, those thoughts are happening over there in my left hemispheric, brain, whereas I'm observing it over here in the right contextual brain. Left hemisphere is associated with linear, discrete thinking and time, and also the sensation of time and space is created in the left hemisphere of the brain. And the right hemisphere is context. It's like the totality. Unity consciousness is going to be experienced or constructed more in that right hemisphere. So you're really doing what's called whole mind training. So you're developing the capacity for these right hemisphere and left hemisphere to kind of come online and to work more effectively themselves individually, but also to work together. And I call that simultaneous mind. Imagine like a sniper and spotter team. Like the sniper is like the left hemisphere. He's like radically focused on the target, right? And the spotter is more like the right hemisphere context. He's keeping his eye on the whole context, the wind, the wind speed and direction, any movement, enemy movement, what's going on all around, even their own safety. So that's like contextual awareness. So when contextual awareness comes online, you begin to be able to observe your thoughts. And then you can, like you said, you can engage or disengage. But what's interesting is that in that observation of your thoughts, you begin to see patterns. And so while I was doing that, and now a year into my training, I started to see the patterns that were recurring. And you just identified one really important thing is when you grew up in trauma, which most people have some sort of trauma, because it's even trauma collectively, right? The trauma of our culture, from the Judeo-Christian culture, or from paternalism, if you will, or stuff like that, race, right? Classism, stuff like that. There's a lot of trauma.
Oh, yeah.
The different
it's all
people are going to experience.
Trauma is
all perspective. Yeah, that's right. You begin to see those patterns come up, and you're like, look at that. Like, there's fear, right? There's a lot of fear, and I noticed a lot of fear, and I noticed some self-loathing, right, from my trauma. Like, not self-loathing, but not lack of confidence.
Yep.
I didn't trust myself. And then I started to ask questions. I started to, like, in my journaling practice, start to ask questions like, why does that exist? And I'm like, oh yeah, there's some things around the way I was brought up. Like, I don't think I'm very happy, right? I'm like masking over my happiness, masking over all that stuff with strategies that make me look happy. And one of them was to look successful in the eyes of others.
Yeah.
Right.
I can relate.
To look externally for approval. And part of that was like to get this MBA, become a certified public accountant. Now I got 6 letters after my name. Woo! And to make a lot of money, and that people will think that's good. And people will think Mark is really successful, even though inside I didn't feel it, And so I started to look at that because of the meditation. And I started to think, well, why am I even doing this MBA CPA if it's not inspiring to me? Right? Like, I don't like the work, right? I don't feel identified with it. I don't really like the people. They were fine people, but I wasn't inspired by the people I was working with. And I didn't like who I was becoming. And I couldn't imagine seeing myself doing that for the rest of my life. And I was like, oh. So I kind of had this like existential crisis at 22 years old, going, oh shit, I think I've chosen the wrong thing, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know. And so then meditation shifted to like, if that's not who I am, then who am I? You can appreciate that, right? Because I stumbled upon the dangerous question. The Ramana Maharshi, wisdom tradition of India was to ask that question: who am I?
Mm-hmm.
And when you are honest about it, right, you start to ask the question. You start with the obvious things. Well, I am Mark. Well, what's Mark? Mark's just a bunch of ideas. When I was born, I wasn't Mark, right? When I was born, I had kind of a blank slate, tabula rasa, and then started to accrete all these different experiences and ideas and concepts. And then language started, and I started to bracket and form using those symbols into words, into sentences. And I started to identify with the thought structures and the sentences that I was articulating. But all that was just a bunch of ideas. No different than the idea of Mark is no different than the idea of Texas. If you fly over Texas, you look down, you don't see Texas, you just see land. It's the idea of Texas is in the idea of people, right? And it's a strong idea because people are really like, Texas is real. Like, no, it's not. It's an idea, just like money is an idea. You know what I mean? So I saw that Mark was, it's an idea. I'm not Mark. So if I'm not Mark, then I'm not my thoughts and I'm not my emotions. And I'm not this MBA I'm getting, and I'm not the CPA. I'm not, I'm not my Jeep, right? I'm not my job. Of course, those are easy. And then you get into like, well, it's a little bit harder to say you're not your thoughts and emotions, but because I had the experience of being able to observe my thoughts and emotions, I could clearly say with impunity that I'm not my thoughts and emotions. And then I would say, well, maybe I'm my body, because most people identify with their body. And when I investigated that, I came to the absolute conviction that I am not my body either, because my awareness was not located within my body. It was all around it. Now you can very clearly identify thoughts within your mind, within your brain, but the field of consciousness is throughout your body, and awareness itself extends beyond the body. It's everywhere. And I was like, holy shit, I am not my body. And I've had experiences and, during some extreme training in the Adirondacks and many times in the SEALs where my awareness was aware of my body, which was aware of my thinking, but I was not within my body. I was able to see, all around and experience all around this. That happens to a lot of spec ops guys who are like, deeply trained and spend, a lot of time in silence and that intuition and kind of like deep awareness begins to open up. So I was doing that and having these incredible experiences. And then also what would happen. So the next phase, so I'm describing like 4 discrete phases of meditation. First is kind of like preparatory practices for breathing for arousal control, right? To activate your parasympathetic nervous system, because most people are stuck in hyperarousal just because of our culture. And what happens, Kevin, as you know, is that the parasympathetic, which is the rest digest, whereas sympathetic is fight or flight, the parasympathetic nervous activation pathway, which is neurotransmitters, goes dormant or atrophies. And so they can't be activated. And so you need to like reactivate it. You can do it through blunt force with like a stellar ganglia block therapy, where they inject Novocaine into the base of your ganglia cells, and then that basically freezes both sympathetic and parasympathetic. And then when it comes back online, your parasympathetic pathway opens up, and people just have this incredible like decompressive feeling. And all this pent up anxiety and stuff that they had over years just gone. Or you can do it through breathing practice, because deep diaphragmatic nostril breathing massages the vagus nerve. And that massaging activity, activates that parasympathetic. So it's going to keep on pumping that parasympathetic pathway to open until finally it does. And then you can have this, maintain this absolute balance between stimulation and relaxation. So that's a preparatory pathway. And then you have the practice of attention control and concentration, which will naturally open up. And then you can actively practice mindful awareness or mindfulness, which is to be watching your thoughts, but not engaging with them. But then there's a 4th step, and that is once your brain gets attuned to this simultaneous mind, where you can watch your thoughts, but you're not your thoughts, you continue to stay with that witnessing, but then you turn away from, instead of like being aware of thoughts, you begin to just disassociate, and like this called turning the light around. You begin to turn your attention toward awareness itself. So what I mean by that is it's about attention control. In mindfulness, your attention is still outward toward what's happening in your either inner space or outer space, right? Oh, thoughts are happening. Oh, emotions are happening. Oh, sensations are happening. Oh, planes flying over. Oh, interesting. It's not who I am. It's all just happening. I'm aware. Whereas the 4th step now is to just stop all that Don't pay attention. You're not trying to force it out. It's not concentration. You're just disengaging, and you're turning your awareness around in your mind, and you're looking for awareness itself. You're looking for that which is aware, that which is aware of being alive, being present, the beingness itself, not Mark, not, not the body, but the beingness. And when you do that, sometimes it happens quite naturally, or you can like facilitate it and speed it up by turning the light around. You end up dropping off into non-dual awareness. And this is like a radical flow state where time, becomes really, gooey. You know what I mean? It's like you lose a sense of time and you lose a sense of space. You lose a sense you have a body. I'm sure you've had those moments you just drop off and you just feel everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
You feel everything everywhere. And so that started to happen to me. It was surprising at first. I would come out and I'm like, what the fuck? Where was I? Did I fall asleep? I'm like, no, that was different than sleep. I was present and aware, but there was no thought. It was utterly still. And I would come back and I would have this almost like a golden nugget. I had come back with a gift because I kept coming back with the sensation that I was a warrior. I was meant to be a warrior. So what I was doing in those moments, you're like dropping into your heart or into your soul and just be able to like feel the story, feel the real story for you, and feel into it. And that's like your purpose or your calling, like your causal energy, why you're here. And so I tapped into that. And I felt that my causal energy was, I didn't use that term, obviously at 22, I just felt warrior. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm not a warrior right now. Like I'm a certified I'm almost a CPA, but I'm auditing books, It's about as far away from being a warrior as you can get. But it kept on happening. Right? I kept meditating. It actually got me really motivated. By now I bought my own bench and I was meditating every morning after my run and started to stabilize that idea that I'm a warrior. And I'm like, okay, I got to do something about this because clearly the path I'm in is the wrong path. And it started to feel more and more like urgent that if I don't listen to this inner voice and I'm a warrior, then I'm going to suffer. Like I'm going to end up like throwing in the towel on my life. You know what I mean? And I was young. I feel very grateful, frankly, that I had this epiphany at 23 or 22, 23 years old. It's like having a midlife crisis at 23. Mm-hmm. Because I saw that if I stayed on this path and became a partner or went into investment banking or whatever, or back to the family business, that I would live that life of quiet desperation that Thoreau talked about. And so many people do because they miss their calling or they're afraid to set out on that hero's journey because it's challenging. They know they're going to be challenged. And I'm so grateful for meditation and Zen and Nakamura because it showed me that I have to follow that yearning, right? That calling. And I saw very clearly that staying on the path of, being a CPA, even if I was a partner making a ton of money, was not the right path. That wasn't my story. That was someone else's story. So I started to ask myself, what's my story? And my story is to be a warrior.
All right, guys, I want to talk to you about a product that I've been using for a long time, over a decade. When I was playing football, one of my main staples in my diet was bison. I got my bison from Great Range Premium Bison. They make some of the finest cuts of bison you can get. These guys have ribeyes, ground bison, all the steaks that you want. My favorite part about Great Range is that you don't have to worry about antibiotics or growth hormones in their meats. Great Range Premium Bison is a family-owned company providing bison meat from family-owned ranches around the country. So please go check out greatrangebison.com.
Now we're talking about 1987 now, and there wasn't barely any information about the SEALs. The SEALs were about 800 people back then, 900 maybe. So it was still a super secret organization. No TV shows about them, The closest was like that old movie, Frogmen, right?
Yeah.
World War II UDT guys. Anyways, so I didn't know anything about the SEALs, and I wasn't thinking military. I started to journal and ask, well, if I'm supposed to be a warrior, how could I do that? I wasn't sure. Military was certainly on the list. I thought maybe flying jets or something like that. But so was first responder. So was just, being like a wilderness guide. So was working as, working on an oil rig, so I started like think or meditate or visualize, like what would all those feel like or look like in the Marine Corps, and this is how synchronicity plays out, right? It was synchronicity that led me to Nakamura, right? To be standing under his, like I was yearning for something and I needed something and it was shown to me and I was paying attention, right? And this synchronicity came back to me this time because I was ready for the next kind of like reveal, so to speak. And I was walking home one night. I used to love to walk. The subways were a pain in the ass. I would only take the subways if I was in a hurry. So I like to walk home, walk wherever I went in New York, and I would take different routes just to see different parts of the city. And I took this new route, and I walked past a Navy recruiting office, and there was a poster in the window, kind of facing out, and the top of the poster said, "Be someone special," and it had Navy SEALs doing cool shit on it. Didn't say anything about the SEALs. It was just like their siren call,
Yeah.
Come in here, and they knew that everyone who came in because of that poster wouldn't make it through anyways, and they'd be in the fleet. You know what I mean? It's like they're selling the sizzle on the steak.
Yeah.
But I looked at that and I just was transfixed. I said, that's it. That's how I'm supposed to be a warrior. And it's a whole, another kind of story about the gyrations I had to go through to get in because I was a civilian. You know what I mean? I was 23 at the time. And I learned from the recruiter that almost all the officers in the SEALs, and I wanted to be an officer because I was going to have an MBA. I was committed to finishing my MBA, by the way. And that commitment came after my conversation with the recruiter said it could take a year and a half to 2 years, to get through all the wickets. So I was like, okay, I'm going to finish up my MBA. I don't want to be a quitter there. It'll look good, it'll be helpful. He said, like, all the officers come from the Naval Academy or ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. And I didn't have either of those, obviously. But he said, there is a program I could submit for where they'll take you as a civilian through officer candidate school directly to SEAL training. But it's rare that anyone gets picked up. He said, I don't think anyone got picked up this year. Sometimes they may pick up one person. So you'd have to be a pretty extraordinary candidate. So the only other path you could take is go enlisted, and you could probably get in pretty quickly. And I was like, God, I'm going to have an MBA, though. I don't really feel like I should be an enlisted guy. I didn't know. It's ironic because nowadays with the people we train, we like, go enlisted first. So we have folks who are like Princeton grads, Harvard grads. And we tell them, go enlisted because it's still hard to get in as an officer if you're not an academy guy. And like 70% of the enlisted guys that go through BUD/S have college degrees or masters. I remember a Harvard law graduate going enlisted in the SEALs. So it's pretty common nowadays. But back when I was in 1988 or so, it just didn't seem like that was the path to go. Although I kind of regret. I wish I'd spent a few years enlisting because I could have been a shooter longer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Officers have about a 6-year run. Anyway, so I said, this is what I want to do. Let's put a package in. And long story short, I ended up getting it.
Oh, you got selected.
I got selected to go through officer candidate school with a direct billet to SEAL training. So November of 1989, when I graduated 85, November of 89, I got my MBA from NYU, Stern School of Business. I became a certified public accountant, passed the exam, took me 4 tries. I'd rather freaking go back to BUD/S than do that again. I tested for my showdown and passed my black belt, first degree black belt. And then I turned my back on it all and got on a bus to go to officer candidate school in Newport, Rhode Island. I went through SEAL training in 1990, BUD/S class 170. And that's where all of that Zen training like revealed itself to me. Because I watched it, how it transformed my mind, through this process I just described and took me away from a life of quiet desperation as a CPA business guy. At least at that phase of my life, it wasn't right for me. Later on, obviously I've gotten into business, but it was because I was supporting my mission, And so I knew all that was benefit, but then I got the BUD/S. And even on the first day, I noticed the difference because, everyone's running around like a chicken with their head cut off in total fear as the instructors descended upon us and just started kicking our asses. And, we're in this like 3-hour beatdown, it's the very first evolution. And gosh, there was this guy, I was loving it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, damn, this is awesome. Like, it's sunny. I'm on the beach in California, Coronado, California. I'm getting paid to work out. And because of my mental control from all the meditation, the instructors to me look like cartoon characters. I mean, like superhero cartoon characters, but like I didn't take it personally because again, I learned to see that I was not my thoughts. And so I knew that they were not their thoughts either. They were just playing a script. They would shout something at me and it would like bounce off. And I would just dispassionately do what they told me to do. And all the while I was maintaining that kind of space between the thoughts and even not allowing any negative emotional reactions. And by then I had learned kind of to talk to myself really positively. So we now call that a mantra. So I had these mantras and I was having a ball. This guy I went to officer candidate school with, Bill, who I thought was equally as fit as I was and gung ho and wanted to be a Navy SEAL for much longer than I had. And at very first evolution, at 3 hours in, the big instructor, Zinke, says, hit the serve after beating us down for the 100th time. So I spin around and run toward the serve. I look back thinking Bill's right beside me and he's running the other way. I'm like, oh shit, he's running to ring the bell. So I turn around to go running after him and Zinke literally just almost tackles me. He says, Divine, just leave that to him. That's on him, right? That's not your job. So I'm like, okay. So I jump back in the ocean, wet and sandy. Next thing. I found Bill later that night and I'm like, Bill, what the F, over, right? Like, I thought you were going to go through buds with me and, you were going to become a SEAL. And he said, Mark, in that moment, I lost control of my mind and I couldn't even remember why I wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Mm. And he wasn't the only one. That first day, we lost like 30 people out of 185. By the end of Hell Week, we were down to like 60 or 45, I think 45. And by the end of training, there were 19 of us left. And I was number one graduate, honor man in my class. And my boat crew was a small team of 6 others. So we were 7 of us. Every one of us made it. So 7 of the 19. And it's because I taught my boat crew these skills, right? And the 4 skills, which are now taught at BUDS, I taught them that breath control practice. The deep diaphragmatic breathing through your nose is going to keep you calm. So anytime that we have a chance, we're going to practice it. And I'm going to remind you guys while we're doing it, just breathe, slow down, breathe through your nose. That's arousal control. Keeps your mind calm. And also it's like an instant recovery. So while everyone else is burning out because they're like, huffing and puffing through their mouth and not controlling your body, we're recovering. Any moment you have, you go for a run and you stop, recover, breathe deeply through your nose, right? You can short, long, anytime. Anytime you have a moment, you recover.
Yeah, I used to do that. I used to do the breathing is so important for recovery.
Yeah.
Because I used to do that in between snaps. So like the play happens, the play is like a 6-second football play happens. It's like all this chaos happens. And then you have to be able to breathe, figure out where the ball is now, get with your whole team. And then it's like, you have to like hear the play that you're running next. Right. And you have to figure out what the offense is doing now and so you're doing all these things, but the whole time I'm just breathing and it makes a huge difference. When I figured that out, and I figured that out through yoga and meditation, was how to just breathe and it was all the nostril, just breathing through your nose, cause you got a mouthpiece
slow and deep.
And you're biting on that mouthpiece, just breathing, just as, trying to control it. Cause you get so out of breath that people just start hyperventilating. And then they're just like, you just watch people just spiral. And
they spiral out because the breath is the kind of the arbiter of your mental and emotional state, mm-hmm. right? You can fact check that by like, if you're ever angry, just notice what's happening with your breath, right? It's going to be shallow and it's going to be through the mouth. You'll be like huffing and puffing, like blowing steam, Mm-hmm. And if you want to end the anger, let it just kind of run, then just slow down your breathing, breathe through your nose and go deep diaphragmatic nostril breathing. And all of a sudden that anger just goes, disappears. Same thing with your thinking, right? Your thinking is going to be agitated all over the place if you're breathing quickly through your mouth. But slow it down like you just described. Suddenly your mind gets clear and you kind of drop more into that high alpha, low beta where you can see more. And you need to see a lot. Same thing with SEALs. We say pause, breathe, think, and then act. But the pause and the breathe are critical because it opens up the contextual awareness. Of, oh, now I can see what's really going on, as opposed to like, get all that adrenaline. It gives you hyper focus. So that first skill is incredible. And I taught my small team that. And then the second skill was basically what we were talking about, is to learn that, to develop this insight that you are not your thoughts, that you can actually control your thoughts. So there was active control, meaning when a negative thought comes, you just look at that and say, nope, we're not doing that. Right? We're not having that thought right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you have the thought that I can't do this, you immediately like shoot that in the head.
Yeah.
Throw a lightning bolt at it, or just cancel it out with a big red X in your mind and just say, nope, I got this. I can do this. We got this. And so I would cue my team all the time until they had it in their heads. We got this. Piece of cake. Easy day. Let's go. We got this. So controlling the mind and remaining positive, right? That's critical, right? If you have negative energy, negative thinking, negative emotions, you literally are weakening your body. And over time, you will get some disease, because those negative energies of negative self-talk, self-pity, self-loathing, fear, anger, shame, that literally is life-denying energy. And over time, it will kill you. Whereas positive thinking, starting with courage and acceptance and love and forgiveness, and just like a general attitude of willingness to like really lean into life and to love it, that is life affirming. And if you live with those energies, you will never get sick. You know what I mean? Depending upon how much you believe it, right? Whether you're faking it or not. Faking it would be like toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. So I taught them to be positive and to have a positive internal mantra. And we would help each other, support each other until it became second nature for us. And the third was imagery, right? So I had used imagery. This is kind of a cool story to back up. So when I started to have when I knew that now I wanted to be a Navy SEAL back in the New York period, I knew physically that I could handle it, right? Because I was a martial artist. I was a competitive athlete, swimmer, rower. I was a fairly rugged guy. I could handle a lot of pain. It was like, physically, I think I got this. But I started to weight lift because I wanted to put on some beef, and because I had more of a triathlon swimmer body. And but there wasn't much else I could do physically. So I thought, well, I think mentally, I've done a lot of work with the mind through Zen. What else can I do? And I remembered my swim coach at Colgate got me to visualize my race. And I had a cool experience, because even though it took me months to be able to race swim the whole race, it was a 200-meter breaststroke in my mind. When I could finally do it, and I would stop the stopwatch in my mind race, I was getting roughly the same time, and it was about 3 seconds faster than I'd ever swum. And so I did all this my sophomore year. Well, I ended up getting into a study abroad program that was going to take me over to England or Europe for the fall semester. So I came home in the spring of my junior year, and I missed the entire swim season. And I ran into the swim coach, and he invited me to the championship race, right? And of course, I didn't really want to go, but I respected the guy, and it's hard to say no, you know what I mean? So I found myself on the block, the gun goes off, I dive in. I hadn't been in the pool for a year, practically. And I swim this race, and I remember I'm swimming this race, and I'm feeling great. And I'm like, I feel like I've swum this race before. And I touched the pad, and I got the time that I'd visualized. Isn't that wild?
I used to do that the night before a game. The night I would visualize.
It's like pre-rehearsal, right?
I would, because you spend all week going, with the scout team, going over plays, watching film. And then finally it's Saturday night, you're getting ready to play on Sunday. And I would just visualize myself seeing the backfield set that I know what's coming. I know that, or seeing the offensive lineman in a certain stance. I know it's a pass play. And I would just visualize myself over and over and over again, just getting to the quarterback or making the play in the backfield. And then when it happens, it's almost like, it's like a weird deja vu feeling. Right. You're like, oh, I've been here before, and it's because you visualized it. I visualized it, 400 times last night, and then, then that's not even counting what happened during the week. So I totally understand, but a lot of people, it's just, you're manifesting is what you're doing. You're
pretty much. Yeah. You're pre-rehearsing, you're creating physiological pathways before you have to do the movements, right? Like in your case, the gameplay, for me, the swim. And they've done now tons of studies on that, like this famous Stanford study where they had three groups. One was a control group, one was a visualization group, and for 6 weeks they baselined them. Then they had the visualization group visualize throwing hoops for 30 minutes a day. They had the second group was active group, and they had them actual throw hoops for an hour a day, or maybe it was 30 minutes a day. And then they had one group that did nothing. And when they brought them back to test them after 6 weeks, the group that did nothing didn't improve at all. The group that had visualized improved by 24%. And the group that had thrown free throws, whatever you call them, improved by 25%. So just a 1% difference. That's the power of visualization, because your body and your brain don't distinguish really between what's happening in your internal space versus the real. And as you know, the only place you can have perfect practice is in your mind.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I remembered that. And I'm thinking, okay, what can I add to really cement this in? That I'm going to be the one guy that gets selected to go to SEAL training through OCS. And I said, well, visualization. What if I treated BUDS like a event that I was practicing for? And I knew that I wouldn't know all the different skills, but I could visualize myself as the type of person who's worthy of just kicking ass and taking names. Right. And I knew it was 18 months out or so. And so this is going to give me plenty of time to develop that worthiness, and visualization would be a part of that. So I called it a future self. Like I was going to visualize me as a Navy SEAL trainee going through BUDS. And the only evidence I had of what they did at BUDS was a recruiting video, also called Be Someone Special, where they showed the different phases of SEAL training. And so I inserted myself into that video. But that version of myself was like confident, competent, stronger, just like effortless perfection in everything I did. And I saw myself going through BUDS and even graduating, and I could feel the graduation sun, the sun on my face. I try to bring a lot of richness and intensity to that visualization, and I practice it every day. And remember, I told you it was going to take like 18 months to get in, or before I would ever go to the SEALs. So all this time, I was diligently working on my MBA, working on my CPA, working at Cooper's Library, working on my black belt. But I would, every morning after my run, I add visualization to my breathing and meditation practice. And about 9 months after that, like I'm just plodding along. I haven't heard anything from the recruiter, or checking in every few weeks. And suddenly I had this like something lifted, some veil lifted, or some energy shifted, kind of like the matrix just shifted over here a little bit, and I could see a little bit more. And in that space, I could see or feel or sense that I had already won, that I was going to be a Navy SEAL. I went from hoping that I would get a contract to knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt with total certainty that I would get the contract and that I would be a Navy SEAL. And literally 2 days later, my recruiter called me saying, Mark, congratulations. I got good news. You got the contract. And I remember just smiling to myself and be like, I said, yeah, I know. He goes, what do you mean you know? I said, yeah, I just know. I knew I got that. I felt it a couple of days ago. And he was like, God, you guys are weird. You're going to make a great Navy SEAL, but you're weird. Anyway, so I taught that to my team too. I said, listen, we're going to visualize ourselves like just being fucking highly successful. We're going to try to win every evolution. We're going to get better at getting better every day. We're not going to get injured, right? We're going to manage our energy, and we're going to be together on graduation day. And we would talk about it, and we would visualize it. And I tell you what, there's nothing more valuable than a real powerful vision of the future when you hit those dark night in the soul moments, like during Hell Week. And I remember during Hell Week, like Thursday or Wednesday night of Hell Week, I can't remember which, we're like rowing around Coronado Island, and we're all hallucinating, I remember I'm rowing along, and the guy in front of me is rowing, and literally the paddle slips out of his hand, and he's still rowing, right? Without his paddle, like this. And I grab his paddle as it floats by me, and I smack him in the head. I was like, wake up. Come on. And he's like, oh shit, where am I? We saw this like tsunami wave coming at us, and all of us, we saw the same thing. We're like, wave, and we're like bracing, and there was nothing there. Like, oh shit, man, we're totally hallucinating. But in those moments, we're like, remember why we're here, right? See the win, like see us graduating. We got this, and everyone's like, yeah, we got this. So breathing for arousal control keeps you calm and balanced. The attention control, concentration, and positive self-talk and positive, team talk keeps your mind clear, focused, and generating energy as opposed to sucking energy. And then visualizing that positive future, right? And the type of person you're going to be, right? Through your relentless discipline and training, creates it's a new memory, right? Because the way the brain works, left brain is like your thinking draws from memory and then it projects it into the present and then it becomes your future. And so people wonder why their future looks exactly like their past. It's because they don't change any of their memories. And so you can change your memories through new experiences, trying new things and new positive things, travel, etc. Or you can create new memories through visualization. That's what the future self visualization does. And so I had created a memory, and my team had created a memory where we knew we were going to graduate. And so when things got hard, our brains would pull that memory into the present and would motivate us instead of pull some memory of, oh, I can't do this, or I'm not worthy, or you know what I mean? Or I don't know. Incredible. And then the fourth skill is just because of the concentration, I was able to hyper focus. And in hyper focusing, I realized, and it's nothing new. It's not like I, discovered the wheel here. I said, you know what? I can only do one thing at a time. And so it's better. This is where like the slow is smooth, smooth is fast mantra comes from. It's better to slow down and to figure out what's the one thing that you can do that you can actually get your hands around and do it. That's going to have the most immediate and best impact. Right? Because a lot of times, when the crisis hits, everyone running around with a chicken, with their heads cut off, and they're going to leap on the target that may be leading them down the wrong road, or they're going to be overwhelmed by the totality of what's facing them, or they're going to, They're not going to take the time to think, what's the most important thing that I can do right now? And can you chunk it into the smallest little piece so you can just start moving, right? Because doubt is eliminated through action. You just got to start moving. I'm sure you've had like plays go to shit and you're like, well, we just got to figure this out. We got to work our way through this, right? But you don't stop.
Yeah, you don't stop. When you screw up, when you screw up, you just keep running.
You keep going.
You keep running to the ball.
Same thing in the SEALs, right? Everyone thinks, well, SEALs, we train so relentlessly that our ops must look like, Mission Impossible. Everything's perfect. Like, fuck no. There's sausage making all the way, but we find a way or make a way around all the obstacles. And we visualize not only it going right, but we visualize what to do when things don't go right. So that mental rehearsal, you want to have both sides of the equation. Like, what do this is going to go well. So I practice it going perfectly well, but no plan survives contact with the enemy or the opposition, right?
Yeah.
Or the opposing team. And so you got to visualize what you're going to do when it doesn't go your way and have a positive outcome for that. Because the failure is not an option. We used to say that, so failure is not an option. It's not because we couldn't fail. It's because we didn't recognize the idea of failure. There's winning and learning.
Yep.
So those skills, we call the big four skills. I've been training those to SEAL trainees now through SEALFIT, my company, since 2006. And we have a 90% success rate getting guys through SEAL training. Isn't that incredible?
That's incredible.
If you think about the numbers of my class are pretty average. Like 85% usually fail. Sometimes 90%. Quit or get injured. I think it's the same thing. Most injuries I call them quinjuries.
Yeah.
Right?
Are you hurt? Well,
negative thinking.
Well, we used to call it, are you hurt? Or, in football, it's like, are you hurt or are you injured? Because an injury is like, you can't go. Like something is go, right? Like your leg will fall off or something, or like, like your leg is broken in half and you can't go, or is it just, are you just hurting? And I, to me, you're just being a puss. It's like, are you being, You're being soft, and that you're looking for an excuse not to go.
And so most people who quit or who get injured at BUD/S, that's what it is. It's a quit injury. Now there are some serious accidents. So it's not, it's not an absolute, but, 90% of the guys that we trained get through BUD/S because here's the thing. They don't just, it's like the idea of going from theory to practice to mastery. Like when I work with these guys, especially back in the day, my business kind of expanded more into corporate training now and whatnot. But when I was solely exclusively focused on SEAL training or Spec Ops trainees, they would live with me at my training center in Encinitas. And we would train, like, we would have a structured 30-day program, but then a lot of guys would just live who were local, or some people moved to California. They lived with me, and I put them up, and they had to, they had to do chores and clean everything, but we would be up training at 6 a.m. and sometimes 2 or 10 at night. And I had my coaches, and some of my coaches were SEALs, and the training was relentless. So we turned these skills into practices. We practiced them in the morning ritual. We practiced them in the evening. We practiced them before training sessions, during training sessions, right? It was relentless. And so they internalized them. They mastered the skills. Just reading them in a book or listening to them on a podcast, you can be like, that's really interesting. They're not going to do you any good unless you practice them so that you can actually internalize them. So I think, like, if I had one innovation or contribution to this SEAL and Spec Ops community, it was to is to introduce these warrior skills, which existed in ancient warrior traditions. Like, I know the Spartans did this stuff, and I know the samurai did this stuff, right? I know they did. The Spartans were famous for, like, filling their mouths with water and, like, sprinting with full gear on. And if you spit out the water, you got beaten. Now, I wouldn't necessarily beat my SEAL candidates, but I made them run with water in their mouth and learn how to breathe through their nose, right? Stuff like that. But the SEALs weren't teaching this stuff. Like when I went through training, they weren't teaching. They didn't teach this stuff until I started SEALFIT, and my guys were starting to show up at BUD/S, and they were crushing it. And then those guys started to come back as instructors. And so it was around 2010, maybe 2012, as I started SEALFIT in 2006, where now I had SEALFIT trained SEALs were coming back to BUD/S as instructors, and they started to teach this stuff and to recommend my book. 2 books, actually. There were 2 books they recommended, The Way of the SEAL and Unbeatable Mind. And so now the SEALs and the Air Force Special Operations and Army Special Operations teach these 4 skills, but they do them as practices in the pipeline training, which has really had a pretty profound effect on the mental skills and actually mental health of the warriors. I call it, like, pre-resiliency training, or just resiliency training. It's kind of redundant. When I went to Iraq, I was practicing yoga. I was doing my meditation, my breath work, my visualization every day while I was there. And the other SEALs I was with who hadn't had that training, they would do their kind of PT run around the compound, rinse, repeat, and they were burning out. The way they would calm down after an op was to come back home and play first-person shooter games. Like, that's about the worst thing to do. Whereas I would come back and I would do my box breathing to relieve the pressure and not the stress, and I would go back to my future self visualization, and I feel really good. So now the force has got these skills, and so a lot less or fewer guys are going to get impacted by post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
The ones who got it the worst were the old timers, right? Who, like, guy who was my platoon senior chief, Mark Crampton's just a phenomenal guy. Committed suicide a few years ago, and he was like one of the best of the best. But he didn't have. There was something that he missed, right, in his own ability to manage, right, his thoughts and emotions. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it's sad. It's the PTSD issue. If you can, you're like addressing it before it happens.
That's right.
So that whenever it does come, whenever those triggers come up, the guys know how to deal with it. Like they
Yeah,
know
they've got
how
the
to,
skills to
yeah,
deal
they
with
have
it.
the skills to address that. It's okay. This is the thought and this is an emotion and we can move through
Right.
it.
And I can calm myself
Yeah.
down and I can get through this. And,
Well, anxiety attack, when people have I've had anxiety attacks. I used to deal with them a lot, especially in football. Like it would happen. I'd feel like I was having a heart attack. It was
yeah,
terrifying. I'm like
right.
22, 23-year-old kid having anxiety attacks for no reason. It was just because I would allow some thought to just run wild in my brain and create all this chaos. And then, and then I'm just trying to I didn't know how to manage it. And it wasn't until I started meditating through yoga and stuff like that that I really, you know, was able to kind of keep those under control and
Yeah.
and just kind of feel it when it was coming and be like, okay, it's all right. Everything's going to be fine. It's not even real. It's the fake scenario that I just made up.
When I started SEALFIT in 2006, and this went on for a long time, none of my other SEAL coaches would step foot in my yoga studio. So I had this big grinder that looked like buds, like 5,000 square feet, ringed with pull-up bars, and that was where we did a lot of our training. And then I had the little functional fitness gym, and we had a CrossFit license, and so we ran a CrossFit membership there too. And then I had the yoga room where we did our box breathing, our yoga, our meditation, and then I had a mat room where we did grappling and our version of self-defense that I learned in the SEALs called combat, or not combat, we called it combat defense. It was actually called SCARS, Special Combat Aggressive Reactionary Systems, based on Sansu Kung Fu. So it was kind of this modular thing. But after a hard workout, I would have the young guys come in and do, I didn't call it yoga. I would call it, we're going to go do some mobility work.
Yeah.
But I'd run them through sun cells and whatnot. And then we did breathing, and I didn't call it pranayama. I said, we're going to do box breathing now. And here's why. It's going to make you, more clear and calm and, more survivable in combat and et cetera. And they're like, bring it on. That's what we need. But my coaches who are all like old time Navy SEALs, they wouldn't step foot in the fucking yoga room. They're like, oh, it's against my religion.
What?
I was like, oh, what? You better investigate that thought.
Yeah.
And it was those old timers who were getting the post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is.
We have a foundation called the Mark Divine Courage Foundation, and we use these skills, right, that I've been describing. In the whole totality of the training is called Unbeatable Mind. It came out of the SEALFIT training, but now it really is its own thing. And so we bring these veterans in for a year-long program, and we start out with a weekend where we teach them the skills of these big four skills: box breathing, how to manage your mind, developing concentration and mindfulness, journaling, visualization, focusing on the right things instead of the wrong things, how to work together as a team. And then we set them up with a swim buddy, and they have a coach and all this positive support. But we don't drop them after the weekend. We hold them for the entire year. And we have 87% success rate in just crushing the post-traumatic stress to where they're thriving, because it works.
Do you think some of that has to do with the I know for me, when I retired from the NFL, I thought I thought I kind of had things figured out. It's like I kind of got life figured out. I felt like I was ready for retirement. Double hip surgery and concussions and neck surgeries and just
the TBI.
Yeah, the TBIs. Like I was getting concussions really easy, and I was like, this is not good. So, so when I got done, I felt like I was ready to be done. I was like, okay, I'm ready. But then I had such a hard time finding my identity.
Right. That's a big issue.
What am I supposed to do now? Because since I was 7 years old, this is what I've focused on. And now it's gone and it's done. What do I do now? And
that's right.
I thought I was like, I'm going to do this bow hunting. I'm going to bow hunt, and I'm going to, do it. And then I realized, okay, I can't just do that all the time because it takes you away from your family. And it's like, I can't just disappear and be gone for 6 months, I can't do that. So I really had a hard time figuring out what, and I missed the camaraderie of the team, of being in the, I just, and then old players would come and be like, hey, cherish this time in the locker room, because you don't get this anywhere else.
That's right.
You don't get that camaraderie. There's nowhere else you really can get it. And
Very hard.
it's just hard to where everybody is everybody's in there for the same goal. And you're like, everybody's from all these different walks of life, and you're just like a bunch of brothers in there, and we're grinding together and getting after it and joking and laughing and gambling and just, all the fun stuff that you get to do, suffering together, really, and then it's gone. And then you're like, you really can't find that anywhere. So do you think your program was good for, like, I think that was probably great for guys to transition.
Right. It's huge for transition. And because we identified that with the SEALs, we didn't need that. Although it came in a little bit because some guys would come thinking they wanted to be a Navy SEAL, but it was like because they watched a lot of movies.
Yeah.
And then we put them through training. And one of our events is sort of like a Hell Week simulation. Not sort of, it's a Hell Week simulation. But it doesn't go for 7 days. It's just 50 hours. The first 50 hours of Hell Week are the hardest. Most people quit in the first 2 days. So we have a program, we call it Kokoro, which means merge your heart and mind into actions. And it's 50 hours of nonstop physical, mental, emotional team training. It's brutal. It's the hardest training in the world outside of SEAL training. So, people would come and train with us for 30 days, and that would be the graduation. Now we chunked it out, and you can just come to that event in the Crucibles. Our next one's in July, by the way. And a lot of times the SEALs these candidates would come up afterwards. They're like, I'm very grateful because, I realized throughout this weekend, this last 50 hours, or maybe they didn't make it. I realized that this isn't for me. You saved me a lot of freaking pain, because if you don't make it through BUDS, you go to the fleet. It's not like you go home. You're floating around on a ship for 4 years.
Yeah.
The enlisted guys. So identity did come into play at SEALFIT, but in a different way. Usually it's like it reinforced your identity to be a Navy SEAL, or it shattered it. But when I had a lot of civilians start to come, and then Unreal Mind became a program in itself, because I had a lot of civilians come and say, I want this training, but I can't do that hardcore stuff. So Unreal Mind further developed to be like a whole developmental system. And part of it, one of the key parts, was purpose finding. Like, identity creation, learning to look at this, developing the skills we talked about, and then like doing exactly what I did and you've done. It's like, what story have I been telling myself, and is it serving me? And you realize that a good portion of the stories you tell yourself don't serve you. And so you deconstruct those. And then you have to ask, okay, so if not that, then what? Who am I, and what am I supposed to do? What's my mission? And then so we have a bunch of practices and processes to help them uncover their mission and their purpose in life, and to create a mission plan and then radically focus on that.
Hey everybody, this episode is brought to you by Black Buffalo. Black Buffalo's nicotine pouches do not contain tobacco leaf or stem. What they do contain is a ton of flavor, and they're packed with pharmaceutical grade nicotine. The magic of Black Buffalo is they discovered a way to make cured edible green leaves behave like the texture of tobacco. And they add food grade ingredients for industry classic flavors. You're in good company if you roam with the Black Buffalo herd. The business was built by dippers with decades of smokeless tobacco use. They manufacture their tobacco alternatives with respect for those products that came before them. Bold flavors, full pouches, metal lids, and a brand that stands for something: American. Their products are also proudly endorsed by brand ambassadors such as MMA Hall of Famer Cowboy Cerrone, NASCAR champion Brian Blaney, rising country star Larry Fleet, and Rob O'Neill, former U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6. So if you're 21 and older and you consume nicotine or tobacco and you want to join the Black Buffalo herd, head over to blackbuffalo.com to learn more. You can order nicotine pouches online, and they ship directly to most states. Or you can check out their store locator to purchase pouches at thousands of retail locations around the country. Black Buffalo, an American brand, pouches worth respect. Can we talk about, I want to talk about that a little bit, because because really what you're doing is you're breaking them down and building them up, teaching them how to do it themselves, how to break yourself down and then build yourself back up to what it is that you're supposed to do. Cause I would imagine that probably 80% of people just walk around and they're just doing what other people do, what they think they're supposed to do.
Right. That's right.
So what can you walk me through that process of just like a quick synopsis of how you would?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, like when we begin this, like we ask them their self-concept, write down, who do you think you are? What are you doing? And a lot of people can't do that, or they come up with what they're doing. And so that's good. That's the baseline. Don't worry about it. If you can't figure it out, that's what you're here for. We're helping you. And then we get them into the practices, right? Because the answer lies within. It's like, I didn't discover that I was going to be a Navy SEAL until I discovered I was going to be a warrior. And that came from within me. Not something I read, not some inspirational character in the world. It came from within. Not to say you can't be inspired by someone and feel that, like, wow, I feel like I'm going to be, I'm supposed to be an NFL player. Great. You're probably close if you feel it, but if it's ego, like I want to be like, those guys, or I want to be like people these days, I want to be a Navy SEAL because they see it all over the, TV. A lot of the guys shouldn't be there. You know what I mean? Because ego. Anyway, so we have them start to do the practices and really start to just sit in silence and I call it listening for that voice, just start listening. But then we also have them do some practices, and these are not uncommon, but they work. Visualizing yourself at your death or near your death and looking back over your life and asking questions like, how did I serve? Right? What's the most important thing what was my most important accomplishment? And it really helps clarify you. Like when I did this, I'm like, wow, it had nothing to do with money or accomplishments in the business world, or, you know what I mean? There's like a certain way of being in service to others. And so then you ask yourself, how am I supposed to serve? Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like? And then you start the combination of contemplation and introspection and like these active practices, like writing your own epitaph from the perspective of your best friend, or obituary. Better obituary as long as you write your obituary from the perspective of your best friend or your father or mother who know you better than anyone else. Visualizing yourself, your life from the perspective of your last moments and last weeks. These are really powerful practices. In fact, they do teach these in the yogic and Tibetan Buddhism, traditions, to reflect upon and meditate upon your death, and it gives you great insight into your life. So we do that, and then we also ask them to begin to articulate in words what we call the 3 Ps: your passion, your principles, and then your purpose. And we want people to start out with passions and principles because those are pointers to your purpose, unless you have a little bit of clarity on your purpose. So for me, I'm passionate about the outdoors. I'm passionate about training and fitness. I'm passionate about adventure. I'm a risk taker. Wow. Okay. That's all pointing toward not CPA.
Yeah.
Right. It's pointing towards something else. And what are my principles? Well, and this is actually instructive too. Is that sometimes if you can't think, well, I'm not sure what my passions are. Well, ask yourself what you're not passionate, what you don't like, what you hate. And that'll point to what you do like. Because it's usually the opposite. And so same thing with principles. Like, what are my principles, Mark? Well, I don't need to make that much. Money doesn't motivate me. Okay. That's kind of like, there's a principle in there, right? I'm not motivated by money. The principle is I'm motivated by service, right? Or something like that. So asking yourself and writing down and journaling and thinking, this is an active process, thinking about what are my passions, what are my principles, distill it to like a list of 3 or 4 or 5 and try to articulate it in one sentence. Why? And then ask yourself, how are these informing my purpose? And we also teach them about the archetypes, Jungian archetypes and like Enneagrammic archetypes. Because my belief is that your calling / your purpose is not something you do. It's what you are. It's what you're meant to be. And so it's an archetypal energy. And there's like a hero's journey to kind of bring that forth into the world. Warrior, right? Healer, artist, right?
Yeah.
Performer. I would say athletic, elite athletes are there's something in there that's kind of like performing your kinesthetic brilliance at a very high level.
Yep.
Which is a different energy that, like, I'm a warrior athlete, but I didn't need to perform with my body. I could look like sausage making as long as I got the job done, but I needed to work together with a team at a very, very high level to do a very precise and dangerous mission. Completely different energy. Some overlap, right, with elite athletics, but a lot of different energies there. So we asked them to write really kind of even take some of the assessments, like the Enneagram assessment helps. You can even nowadays use ChatGPT and just type in everything about yourself and say, help me understand, what archetypes are, are most meaningful for me or emergent for me. And usually you get 2 or 3, but there's going to be a dominant. Mine was dominant warrior leader, then became warrior leader and teacher or coach. Scholar was added later. Now, I'm obviously trainer, teacher, right? And there's a little warrior monk, in me as well. But the warrior theme has always been there. We get them to lock into the archetypal energy that is going to be their hero's journey. And so these things work together, like getting clear about your principles and your passions and what you don't like and what you don't think you are. Those are like North Star pointers. It's like pointing toward the North Star. And then the future self visualization where you're asking like, well, how was my life? How did I serve? And writing the obituary, and it's all this it's like peeling the onion and sitting in silence. And all that work you're doing is starting to like open up, it's shutting off avenues and kind of open you up to possibility until suddenly you just see it, feel it. It's there. And you're like, oh, my purpose is to be this, right? I understand it now. And sometimes it's a huge relief, but it could also bring some kind of like a little bit of a crisis because a lot of times people are doing something that's in conflict with that or it's taking them down the wrong path. Kind of like I was becoming a CPA and working toward this business future. And it was like 180 degrees from where I was supposed to go. And had I not gone through that early kind of rudimentary version of that process and all the meditation, certainly wouldn't be having this conversation today. Right?
Yeah.
I'd be back running the family business, probably an alcoholic.
Yeah. Mulling through life.
Mulling through life.
Well,
yeah.
that those practices helps you break the cycle.
Right. For sure.
Because that's what happens is you get stuck in a cycle of the people. You get in a rut, you get stuck in this cycle of okay, I'm just going to take the easy way and do what I think I'm supposed to do here instead of doing what you are passionate about. Right. And doing what you, like you said, the 3 Ps. I love that because I really strongly believe that if people just really focused on what they were passionate about, instead of focusing on money I think that's how people focus on money instead of something that they're passionate about. And then they're I take it from me. I always thought, okay, when I get to the NFL and I make all this money, I'm going to be happy. And I was so wrong. It's just like, why am I not happy? Well, because money is not going to make you happy.
Money is not going to, status is going to make you happy. Happiness comes from the inside.
Yeah.
Happiness is your natural state, and meditation leads you to your natural state.
Yep.
One more thing about purpose. Oftentimes, I hear people like they've got successful business. And they're like, but my purpose is this, but I can't leave my business. And I was like, I understand. Figure out how to bring your purpose into your business or into your work if you like your work. Or maybe you don't even love your work, but you're just very good at it. And you don't want to risk losing. I get all that, right? Our economy is not set up to be super fluid. You know what I mean? There's a lot of risk associated with just jumping from one ship to another in the middle of a turbulent ocean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so the point here is if you're a business owner or entrepreneur or you run a team is like figure out how to bring your purpose into your work. And so maybe it's like creating some service projects or reorienting your company to be a mission-centric company, even though you're a roofer, right? You're doing it for this and percentage of your, profit goes to a charity or you do some good works in the world, right? There's a lot of ways that you can bring your purpose into your work, which makes everything more aligned. So you become this authentic self person where you don't leave part of yourself at home when you go to work. And so many people just leave their souls at home when they go to work. You know what I mean? And that's why my work has been so soul crushingly devoid of any meaning and purpose for a lot of people. And employee engagement's like 33% or something like that. So we work with companies to find that kind of like real purpose and bring great like synchronicity and joy of training together into the workforce. Like we in the SEALs or you in the NFL, like you go to work and you train together and your stuff together and you grow together. And if someone's not doing that work, guess what? They're off the team.
Oh yeah.
And so we're training companies, but it's got to be led by the CEO or the executive teams. They're like turn your organization into a growth culture where people come and they do things like box breathing together. My company, we box breathe before every meeting together. It's extraordinary what that does for the team.
And it creates a buy-in because people, because I'm a strong believer, and I've just been a part of so many teams, so many different coaching staffs, and they all have different philosophies, right? But the one thing that always stood out to me was that if everybody just buys in to what the mission is here, like just buy in and stop trying to like do your own thing and just buy in, then we have a way better chance of being successful.
Way better.
I'm sure that people at first, when you're like, hey, we're going to box breathe, they're probably like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah. Some people are rolling their eyes and whatever, but you're right. And here's the thing. If they won't buy in, they don't belong in the team.
Right.
Even if they're smart operators, this is a cultural transformation I'm talking about. And it's important and it actually has to happen. If you want to like beat AI or partner effectively with AI, we've got to develop the most human skills that we have, which is creativity, insight, intuition, spontaneous knowing, especially at a team level, is extraordinary. Those are not found by doing the same thing we've done in the past. That left brain linear rational thing. By the way, AI is going to be able to do all that, if not already. So we've got to lean into the right brain, whole mind thinking that's going to allow a team to create with like incredible intuition and insight. And that's trained through these skills that we've talked about in this podcast.
Yeah, very, very.
I think
cool
that's
stuff.
the future of leadership development. Yeah.
Very cool stuff, and it works, man. Where can people sign up for your program?
The website that I do all this training through is unbeatablemind.com.
Okay.
Unbeatablemind.com. We have a couple ways to engage. A 30-day program, which is like just 20 minutes a day or so. We've got a year-long course called the Foundation Course. We've got a coaching certification, mental toughness coach certification. And I've got a year-long program for executives who want to work directly with me. It's like a mastermind. All that information on unbeatablemind.com. Of course, I have my own podcast called The Mark Divine Show. So I talk a lot about that. I do a lot of solo casting now where I teach, and then I'll have in-person guests occasionally. And my books can be found on Amazon. So I've gotten 6 books now. Most recent one is called Uncommon. Came out in July of last year.
And you've written and published them all yourself?
Yeah. Well, no. I self-published. I've written them all myself, but I self-published one. It's funny, Derek. That's the one I make the most money on by far. But I had publishers like St. Martin's Press and Reader's Digest for the other 5. I think going forward, though, I'm going to self-publish all of them.
Yeah.
I've got a few more in me. I'll self-publish them.
Yeah, why not? Right. I mean, if you know how to do it now, you kind of figured it out. So, well, Mark, I really appreciate the time, brother. And that was just a great conversation. I could go for another 2 hours talking about this stuff.
Oh, I know. It's fun. I love talking to folks who've been in the arena, like you have.
Yeah.
It's very helpful for your guests, I think, to like hear these conversations because, you know what I mean? We used to say there's no like special operators. They're just people who do the work, who show up every day and do the work.
Yep.
And so if you're not training your mind, someone else is training it for you and the results will speak for itself. So I highly encourage everyone to start training your mind today. And that starts with getting your body under control through arousal control practices, box breathing, and then concentration, attention control, and then mindfulness, and then turn the light around and look for awareness, and you will find it because awareness is your natural state. And that's where you're going to find true happiness and true peace.
Yep. And it all starts with discipline and patience because
that's right.
You have to have the discipline to do it every day, and you have to have the patience to let it work.
let it germinate, right? You can't crawl, walk, run. People are like, they want to take a pill for awareness, or for higher levels of, or for happiness. There is no pill for happiness. That's called a drug. That'll lead to suffering. Happiness comes through a process of ripening, training your mind, and like it's a process of ripening. And when the fruit is ready, it'll fall from the tree. And it'll happen very suddenly. But it takes time and patience to set the conditions for it to happen.
Yep. Great advice.
Hoo-yah.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you, brother. I know you got to get going. So do I. I got to go get my daughter here. So
right on. It's been great talking to you, Derek.
All right. Thanks for listening to the Wolfe Untamed podcast. Be sure to check me out on Instagram, DerekWolfe_95. Check out the Wolfe Untamed podcast on YouTube. You can listen on all the other platforms, as well as DerekWolfe.com.